Let's talk about the U.S. housing market, because right now, it is sending some seriously mixed signals. On one hand, it looks like there are way more sellers than buyers. But on the other, trying to actually buy a home feels impossible. So today, we're going to unpack this paradox and figure out what is really going on.
Take a look at this number, 46.3%. Right now, it probably just looks like some random statistic, right? But trust me, this single number represents a massive, massive shift in today's housing market. And understanding it, well, that's the key to solving this entire puzzle.
So what is that 46.3% all about? According to Redfin, it means that active home sellers now outnumber active buyers by that much, and that is the biggest gap we've seen in more than 10 years. To put it simply, there is way more supply than demand. Now, on paper, that should be an absolute dream for anyone looking to buy a home.
And that right there is the big question. If buyers are supposed to be in the driver's seat, why does it feel like such an uphill battle? Why aren't home prices just plummeting? This is the paradox we're going to get to the bottom of.
So first, let's really break down this core contradiction we're calling the Great Buyer's Paradox.
Okay, now let's look at the raw numbers. We're talking about an estimated 1.99 million sellers versus just 1.36 million buyers. You do the math, that's a surplus of nearly 630,000 sellers. You can really see just how huge that gap is.
In this slide, this perfectly captures the tug-of-war that's happening. The theory says this should be a buyer's market, with more choices and more power to negotiate a better deal. But the reality is a brutal affordability crisis, fueled by sky-high mortgage rates and just general economic jitters that are keeping potential buyers on the sidelines.
And don't just take my word for it. Redfin's chief economist, Daryl Fairweather, points out that this isn't just a normal seasonal thing. Because the data is seasonally adjusted, this record gap points to a fundamental drop in buyer demand. In other words, this is a real trend, and it's all about high costs.
So you have to be wondering, how did the market flip so dramatically and so fast? The story of just the last 4 years, it's pretty staggering.
This timeline really tells the whole story. Just 4 years ago, it was the complete opposite. Buyers actually outnumbered sellers by over 30%. Bidding wars were everywhere. Then the pandemic hit, and those ultra-low mortgage rates, we're talking below 3%, locked millions of homeowners into these amazing deals. And now, rates have shot past 7%, and the entire dynamic has been turned on its head.
And that brings us to this really key concept, the mortgage rate lock-in effect. I mean, think about it. If you've got a mortgage at 3%, are you really going to sell your house just to buy a new one with a 7% mortgage? Probably not. And for a while, this is what kept a lot of potential sellers, who are also potential buyers, out of the market entirely, keeping inventory super low.
Okay, so all of that history brings us to today and the puzzle of this year's spring market, where the signals are getting really, really mixed.
So, is there any good news for buyers? Actually, yeah, there is. For the first time in a while, we are seeing more homes for sale. And why is that? Well, that lock-in effect is starting to ease up a little bit, plus a whole lot of new construction is finally hitting the market. That gives buyers more options to choose from.
But, and this is a big but, here's where it gets complicated. On the one hand, yeah, home prices have stayed pretty flat, and there's more inventory than we've seen in years, which is great. But on the other hand, mortgage rates have crept back up, and just general affordability is nowhere close to what it was before the pandemic price explosion. It's a classic case of one step forward, one step back.
So, we've gone through the paradox, the history, and the current riddle. What does any of this actually mean for you?
First off, you got to know this isn't one single housing market across the country. It's really a tale of two very different markets depending on where you live. Down south, especially in places like Texas and Florida, conditions are looking best for buyers. Meanwhile, up in the Northeast, it's still very much a seller's market, so location matters now more than ever. So, if we're going to put today's market in a nutshell, it's this. Yes, you have more choices than you've had in a long, long time, but the cost of entry, that mortgage, is the highest it's been in years. And that leads to the ultimate contradiction. Buyers do have more leverage, but that leverage is pretty much useless if they can't afford to get in the game in the first place. And that leaves us with this fundamental shift in the whole housing story. For years and years, the main challenge was just finding a home to buy. Now, the homes are there. The real question has become, can anyone actually afford them? It really seems like the biggest hurdle has moved from the front door straight to the bank.